There's a certain kind of magic that comes with a game's hub world. A place that feels like home, somewhere to retreat between adventure and combat, or even a space where all of your accomplishments are woven together and put on display. These areas can create a sense of routine, offer a chance to interact with characters of its world, or provide a more diegetic approach to in-game menus. They also serve the story, giving you a place to return to, a familiar setting that evolves alongside your journey. Maybe it's nostalgia, but hub worlds have always been one of my favourite comforts in games. That idea goes beyond the traditional hub. It includes towns, home bases, travelling communities, creative spaces, or bustling cities. But for this particular analysis, in comparison to my own game, Rogue Pocket Quest, the form matters less than the atmosphere these spaces create, the sense of place they provide, and how they both support the player's experience and the game's design needs. In many cases, hub worlds serve as the player's first point of contact with the game. They introduce the mechanics, hint at the world's lore, and subtly set the tone for the adventure to come. Beyond simply being a starting point, they help orientate the player, establish a sense of place, and provide context for the challenges and stories that will unfold. More importantly, there are also spaces the player returns through the game. A familiar pub to rest, a blacksmith to upgrade weapons, shops to stock up on items, and a bank to safely store treasures. This is exactly where I plan to start my game, giving players a hub that provides further utility as their journey progresses, and that place is the Perilous Pint. The idea for this pub has always been planned since the inception of when I came up with the universe and the lore for this game, and in this case, when looking at the art style I used from the Kenny asset pack that started it all, I couldn't see anything other than a tone that was silly and had a sense of humour. The Perilous Pint not only incorporates the game's sense of roguelike elements, with restocking items, item storage, and semi-permanent upgrades, it sets up the dungeon the game explores, the mystery of why it's here, who owns the dungeon, the pub, and stories of other adventurers in the dungeon itself. The game will open with an interaction between the player and a game's character at the entrance of the dungeon called a Peril Gateguard, who, with a very strong Northern English accent, explains, due to bureaucratic process, they can't enter the maze just yet until they're all signed up. So as the player steps away to the south of the dungeon entrance, they first enter the Perilous Pint to see a room jam-packed full of characters, shops, and other adventurers. But before we dive into that, the player will make their way to the training grounds to get a small tutorial, competency test, and an introduction that doubles in setting up the world and a bit more. The player is then asked to pick up one of the two complementary weapons, a sword and a staff, to try two basic combat mechanics of shooting and swinging a sword around, and then smashing up a few barrels. This is where they'll also learn to dodge through enemy projectile attacks. Once completed, the player will have to talk to the safety officer again and sign a waiver, which is kind of just a joke that the player doesn't actually have to read, but provides some sense of humour and doubles in explaining the lore of the game and the roguelike elements of the dungeon. In a very terms and conditions style of writing, in short, it explains that the dungeon is owned and operated by a corporate company who are not responsible for any mishaps in the dungeon or any missing items, which means when the player dies in the dungeon, they lose everything. And a Peril Patrol member, like the ones that the player was introduced to before, will come and save them and drag them out of the dungeon in an attempt to save their life. Once completed, the player is issued with the membership card that serves as a stats and information menu, and they will be able to head off into their first dungeon crawl. At this point, I'm not fully happy with the design of this card, so it will probably change later. But back to the pub itself. To get things rolling, I had to start with the systems that involve handling these shopkeepers. Luckily, I had already set up dialogue and interaction systems previously, so I could just get the required menus to appear easily. I ended up creating 4 individual systems for the player to interact with: the bank system, the item upgrade system, the equipment upgrade system, and a shop system that is reusable and can be stocked by multiple NPCs. So I created the design for the banker and the bank vault previously when creating the micropub within the dungeon. But now it was time to create the interface, which at this point is really kind of messy looking, and I'll have to reiterate over it again at a later date, but what matters is the practical functions work for now. There is actually a lot more that goes on underneath that allows this to work than you'd think. It has to be recreated slightly differently than the inventory system, and how it handles moving items between the two lists that are displayed, and what to do with each one when one of these slots is selected, and make sure there were not any weird bugs like duplicating the items or changing the stats in any kind of weird way. But now the player can deposit their loot for later, they can store their gold and dust permanently, they can deposit and withdraw their chest keys they've found or want to take with them into the dungeon, they can even use their gold and dust to purchase more bank slots. But lastly, I have configured the same system to adjust when the player is interacting with the banker in the dungeon. Since the micro version will use a one-way deposit system, it will display just the number of empty bank slots you have left and allow the player to store the items. Once they exit the interaction, there is no way to retrieve them until they return to the Perilous Pint. I then created the blacksmith character who will allow you to upgrade your weapons to the next level of materials available. It will list every item in your inventory that can be upgraded and filter out any that can't, like consumables and items with the final Dragonstone level material. When selecting an item, it will tell you what stats will upgrade with the item and calculate its price based on how many stats it has, the material type, and what item category it's in. And I can easily adjust those values and what they're worth. Along the top, you will see the gold and dust in the player's current inventory and how much is currently in their bank as well. So the player never has to run back to their bank and get their funds out. Once it's stored, it's safe and secure, and usable in any shop that isn't inside the dungeon. I then created this very cool, unique looking hammer for him to hold and a furnace to go along with it in his little area of the pub. So the shop's UI layout took a lot longer than all the others. It might not look like it, but I actually sat there for several hours moving everything around just to find the best layout and trying to fit it all on the screen because I needed it to be easily readable and flexible for all shopkeepers who have different quantities of items. But once again, this may change in the future as well. But now we have a system that an NPC can open, and when it is open, it picks up all the items in a list that the NPC has and displays them. The list I can create on the NPC's end using different methods depending on the shop, meaning it is curated for each NPC talking to the game's loot generator. So items can be fixed or they can be randomly generated to the conditions I set. To start with, we have the bartender who just serves food, a magic shop that sells potions and magic weapons, a shopkeeper that sells armor, and one that sells melee weapons. And lastly, a mysterious shopkeeper who for extortionate prices will sell you dungeon keys and some of the items you may have dropped on your death previously. And once again, on the NPC end of things, I can enable them to have the ability to buy items or not. I can set it where the inventory is unlimited, or if the player can only purchase one of an item. Every item is set to just 1 or 2 coins at the moment, as well as the sell prices, just before I sit down and figure out how much everything's worth and get everything nice and balanced as well. So lastly, bringing back the NPC that is used for the tutorial, after you complete your first dungeon crawl, you will be able to return to him and upgrade your equipment, such as the capacity of your inventory and how many items you can put in your item bar for quick access. However, there is a catch, and this is where things get a little tricky because this is a free mobile game. I do have to implement some level of monetization, so I'm going to have to keep it simple, just like with Foot Joust, making a free version and a paid version. So to have access to upgrading your bank and equipment slots from the beginning amount and access the mysterious cellar, you'll need to upgrade your game's dungeon membership card. And at this point, it will just be a cheap, single one-off microtransaction, and all the characters will make some sort of reference to having a premium dungeon card to access additional services or something like that. This would also make it a little easier if I were to port this game to other systems that weren't mobile, where the game is sold up front with a full version. But none of this is implemented yet, so now's your chance to tell me this is a really awful idea and not to do it before it's too late. Now, you can't have a pub with just shopkeepers, so to bring more life into this, I created some NPCs that appear all over the pub, where every time it's loaded in, they appear randomly in different locations, along with food items sitting on tables. At the moment, I've only handmade about 7 NPCs just for testing, who you can all interact with, who will give you interesting information about the lore, or just funny dialogue that helps make the pub more interesting. And I plan on creating dozens and dozens, maybe over 100 unique characters to fill this with, all with their own unique dialogue. But for now, as an example, we have a guy who brags about completing the dungeon 75 times, someone who talks about trading a seal fragment they found in the dungeon for a pint, a drunkard, someone talking about a secret door they've found in the dungeon, or just another adventurer telling you to f*** off. And at some point there will be very special NPCs that give or trade items with you, or maybe have quests or something. But this aspect won't come until there's more gameplay to go with it. But I'm also going to need your help with this. I think it would be really cool to include you guys in the game as other adventurers in the pub. So when I release a demo and a test build to players, I'll give you the option to submit a screenshot of your character with a couple of lines of dialogue and a name. And I'll just recreate it and put it in the game, under very heavy moderation, of course. So that's the Perilous Pint for now and my current vision for it. Mostly done, but not quite there yet. and certainly a lot more changes and adjustments to come. A place like home, full of life, characters, and a chance to rest and prepare for your next dungeon run. Somewhere that doesn't feel like a backdrop, and all of this will be especially true when the sound and music is created. Alright, that's all. Don't forget to subscribe. Peace out.